Dracula. Hello, I am Adam W. Rodriguez. Welcome to my channel. I am your host here at the Art of AWR. For this particular video, we are going to be doing a review of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's a character that's been on my mind very heavily lately. I'm going to go into it a bit more as I do my book review. But before we begin, I would like to invite you to subscribe to my channel. I am an artist, a writer, and a visual painter for many years. If you like the idea of a guy who's been in and out of the arts and entertainment industry, doing book reviews, making observations and recommendations about art, literature, comic books, etc., subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, and then hit that bell so that you get new notifications every time a new video drops. Excelente! Let's talk more about Dracula. Now, I've been thinking a lot about Dracula lately because I'm about to play Dracula in a production that's coming up in 2023 in the spring. It's going to be called Disco Dracula, and it's supposed to be a dark comedy. But I wanted to get in touch with the source material so that I could write a more interesting and convincing style character. Yes, it's going to be a comedy, but I think getting in touch with the source material is important. The show that I'm doing is a devised play, which means that I'm going to be doing a lot of writing, and I'm going to be writing my own material throughout the show, so I want my character to have some authenticity, and I think getting in touch with the source material is exactly how to do that. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of Dracula in the actual book Dracula, and I'm going to go into that here further. But first, I want to talk about the history of Dracula. It came out in 1897. Bram Stoker, an Irish author, was a very sickly child. He spent a lot of time bedridden in his youth. This is back in the mid-1800s or so. So we're talking about old medicine, the kind of medicine that's all about balancing the humors, which is a lot of enemas and bleeding and throwing up, stuff like that. It's no fun. It's no fun for anyone. Bram Stoker has a lot of experience with a dude lurched over him while he's in bed, taking the blood from his body. His mother also escaped plague, so sickness, ailment, and decay was something that was very prominent in Stoker's life, which I'm sure aided in sort of the dark and eerie atmosphere that he created here in Dracula. Speaking more about influence on Bram Stoker, 26 years prior to Dracula, Carmilla was published, which was this great vampire piece of fiction that was written by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. And even before him, in, I believe, 1819, John William Polidori wrote The Vampire with a Y. Both of those obviously had some influence on Bram Stoker's Dracula, as elements of both of those stories made it into his book as well. Awesome. Let's talk about writing style. Bram Stoker used a epistolary format. That's a narrative style that involves using journal entries, ship's logs, diary entries, letters, that kind of thing. It gives it this sort of found footage kind of feel. It almost authenticates the horror in the story and makes it almost a little bit more real, which I think is done to some good effect. Epistolary format tends to make stories drag a bit, but sometimes it works. And sometimes it even works in Dracula. The whole first half of the book, the eeriness that is presented in these journal entries are actually quite chilling. The whole first part is Jonathan Harker visiting the Count, trying to finish this property deal with Count Dracula, who is now moving to England. The whole thing starts off really eerie and just continues to get worse and worse for Jonathan Harker, and it leaves on such a note that you're left just kind of wondering with this dark sense of what just went on. It was really, really well done. Yes, it drug a bit, but it really wasn't so bad. I enjoyed it. The next chunk of the book is Lucy and Mina, their friendship. There's a lot of letters being exchanged, a bunch of diary entries, and it's mostly them talking about how much they love each other and the crazy, wacky things that are going on in their lives, all with this kind of ominous darkness in the background, in the atmosphere. There's this wonderful bit of news that comes through, coupled with a ship's log when Dracula actually shows up on the shores of England. It's quite excellent, it's quite eerie, it's quite well done. Right up until the point, about halfway through the book, when Lucy's story arc finally ends, that's when the epistolary style does this book absolutely no favors. It starts to drag really, really, really badly. At this point, we've got, let's talk about characters, because that's what we're talking about at this point. At this point, we've got several male characters that are super interchangeable. None of them are terribly interesting. You got your Dr. Seward, you got your Quincy Morris, you got your Arthur Holmwood, and then you've got Abraham von Helsing. All of these guys are basically writing journal entries and letters to each other that just basically talk about how much they appreciate each other's friendship and how brave the others are. And it's really kind of annoying for the most part. It becomes extremely redundant. Now, I read the unabridged version of Dracula. I'm showing you the back of the book where it says the complete and unabridged version of Dracula. Do yourself a favor. If you're going to read Dracula, read an abridged version. I'm sure that the stuff that they cut out is some of the redundant letters that go on in the whole second half of the book. The whole second half of the book turns into this sort of watery detective story where they're trying to figure out where the Count is and how they can find him. And honestly, the guys in the book are pretty useless. If it wasn't for Mina Harker, nothing would happen. She's the only one who knows how travel works, and maybe we should just put all of these journal entries together to develop a narrative so we can figure out where the Count is. That kind of thing. Mina Harker's organizational skills are what solves the entire case, and her character in general has the most depth. Back in those days, and I'm not going to say that every single novel did this back in those days. This is kind of particular to certain authors. And that is that the males tend to not have a lot of range of feeling, and the females do, particularly Mina. So Mina ends up being one of the most fleshed out characters in the whole book, and she ends up being kind of my favorite character, except for maybe Renfield, who is actually quite awesome. Renfield never has a single journal entry, but it's mostly people reacting to Renfield, and his character arc is interesting, it's weird, and by the end of it all, you're left wondering what the hell just happened, and I think that makes for a really cool arc. Most of the other character arcs are pretty... Mina's is great, Lucy's is excellent, and then Renfield's is pretty great as well. I personally believe that because of how much the back half of this bad boy drags, it totally takes away from the eeriness of the Count. The Count himself maybe appears in about 30, maybe 40 pages in the whole back half of the book. As in, only about 30 to 40 pages are people actually in a room interacting with Count Dracula. For the most part, it's just people talking about Count Dracula, or how concerned they are for Mina, or how much I appreciate your friendship, cowboy from Texas. Who cares? Who cares?
I'm so sorry about your hat.
Absolutely.
Count ends up being this kind of weird little goblin with a unibrow that is just not that terrifying. And because of so much deep, redundant epistolary letter writing, when it gets to the parts where Dracula's there and he's supposed to be scary, I think the terror is totally watered down. It's disappointing. It's anticlimactic. You only get, when they finally catch up with Dracula at the end of the book, you get 5 pages. 5 sweet pages of them actually interacting with Dracula. And most of that is just the box that he's in. It's not great, guys. It doesn't end well, and it makes me kind of sad. You know who the scariest character in this whole book is? Lucy. Her story arc is chilling and absolutely terrifying. If they had actually ended the book right around the halfway mark, I'd have been like, this is one of the best gothic horror books I've ever read. I highly recommend it to everyone and anyone. And it's not that I don't recommend Dracula to people. Bram Stoker's great. I mean, this is a good book. There's a reason why it is considered a foundational piece of vampire literature that all vampire literature seems to be taking initiative from. But for the most part, the whole back end of the book is kind of lame. When it comes to my 1 to 10 score. Man, Bram. I can't give you a 5. That's just not right. That's not right, because this is foundational. This is an important book. But I can't give you an 8, Bram. I can't do it, man. I'm gonna give you a 7. I'm gonna give you a 7. Bram Stoker's Dracula is a 7 of 10, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of that 7 of 10 is because it's such a foundational and important piece of literature when it comes to Gothic horror and vampire fiction. Your reputation is what gives you that 7. Otherwise, I'd probably have given you a 6. But you know what? The whole first half of that book is great. It's chilling. It's really, really well done. It's the back half that gets a little too lengthy, a little too arduous to read, and quite frankly, kind of disappointing when it comes to the parts of the book that are supposed to be quite climactic, and they're not. So that's my take. I think it's a solid 7 of 10 Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Sacrilege!
All right, cool. Sorry. Listen, I know I just gave you a really grumpy, kind of overly passionate and snarky review of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Is that cool? I mean, considering how much of a classic this is? I mean, some people would say that there would be no classic vampire fiction if we didn't have Dracula. There would be no Underworld. There would be no Twilight. There would be no Blade. But, you know, maybe. Who knows, right? Carmilla was a good book. Yeah, Carmilla was a good book. So there is other vampire fiction, you know. I mean, maybe Bram is the reason why vampires are as popular as they are. Maybe he isn't. Who's to really know? There's no denying the fact that this is an influential book, however. So that credit I have to give Bram Stoker, because I would be a fool not to. Yes, I gave him a 7. Yes, I think it's justified. I think part of the problem is that I read Carmilla right before I read this book, and Carmilla is such a great story. It was so easy to read. And yes, significantly shorter than Bram Stoker's Dracula. Very concise. And I got to spend a lot of time with the monster and understanding the monster a little bit more. It made me a little bit more sympathetic. Whereas Dracula himself is very rarely seen. And when he is seen, he's kind of a weird little goblin. And who cares? Who cares? Anyway, as far as Gothic horror is concerned, I couldn't recommend this book more. Definitely read the abridged version. You'll be doing yourself a favor. You'll probably be way less frustrated, but it's totally worth the read. I'm glad I read it. As frustrated as I sound about this book, I'm glad I finished it. It's totally worth that in its regard. So, Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's a solid 7 right here on the channel of the Art of AWR. Thank you guys for watching. This has been my review. I hope to see you next time. Later.